Hello. Hi, everyone. It's been a really long time since I've done a live session here, but I have this set of paints and I've actually had it for a little while and I've been wanting to play with it. And the other day I did a little bit and it was kind of fun. So I thought maybe I'd bust it out and try some more of them today. This is a set of Supervision watercolors. As you can see here, it's a Chinese brand. This specifically is their rock mica layered watercolor. So I've used a few of Supervision stuff and they are super fun. The one thing about them to be aware of is that some of them might not be as light fast as you would hope if you are selling professional works of art, but they are super fun to just play with and to let loose with and to explore and to just, love painting with. So sometimes when I feel like I just want to do that, I want to let loose, they are a good solution to pick up. And they're layered watercolor. Layered is what they use to mean their pigments. It's like a dual pigment thing, so that when you paint it, they separate into two different colors and you get these really cool, pretty psychedelic effects going on, sometimes with very different pigments. And then the rock mica part is a little bit more self-explanatory. That's just generally meaning it's got mica sparkliness going on in them. So that means that these are both separating and they've got mica sparkliness. So it's just like super fun all in one tube. And I haven't actually used them yet. So here's a chance to bust them out and start to play with it a little bit and see what's going on. Let me pull all these out. Oh, and I could show you a little piece that I did earlier last week. All right, give me a second to find it. I don't know where I stuck it. I'm gonna be right back. Give me like 30 seconds. Well, apparently I'm crazy disorganized and I have no idea where I stuck this painting that I did the other day, which I'm going to have to hunt out at some point later, but let's not delay right now and let's just get down to playing with some of these then and see what's what. So this looks like it's got some purpley gold stuff going on. Fizzy Dreamer, why are you holding your breath? All right. Get some of that. Ooh, it is really loaded up with mica sparkliness. I don't know if you could tell. Like I squeezed out that little bit and it looks like it's just solid shimmery there. That one's this, and it looks like purpley stuff going on. Let's try some of this one too. This one's got, it looks like red pigment and some green shimmery sparkliness. Okay, so one of the other things I found with some of the other Supervision paints that I played with in the past, so I played with some of their layered stuff in the past, is that when you squeeze it out of the tube, the layered colors especially, they look like one color and then you paint it and then it separates out into all this crazy gorgeousness. And this one looks like it's got a sort of reddish base and a blue shimmery stuff going on. So let's see what happens with that one also. All right. Squeeze out a little of each of these. Let's start with those three just to get things going. And I'm just going to paint some swatches with them. We'll see what happens. And give it some water, because the thing with layered thing with granulating and this mica stuff is that if you give it water to move in, that's when you get some interesting blooms and stuff going on in the paint that you don't see if you just paint it straight. Let's make that swatch a little bit bigger. Okay, that's that one. Let's try all three of these and paint swatches for them. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat here. If I don't see it immediately, I'll try scrolling back every once in a while to make sure I'm not missing anything. It's a little hard sometimes to multitask here with painting as well as keeping my eye on the chat screen. There, let's do that. And again, I'm just dotting some water in there to let it have space to move and flow. And already I can see that second one is separating into, the colors are separating into a purpley, a muted kind of reddish maroon purpliness with blue stuff going on. I think the blue stuff might actually be the mica sparklies. Okay, and this one's got purple as the color base with gold mica sparkly going on. Let's see if I can move my light in a better way to show off what's going on here. So the thing with reflective sparkly stuff is that depending on the angle of the lighting, you're going to see it differently. So when I have my light just on one side, you only see that angle of it. But as I shift it around, you can get more. Someone's asking, you said you live in England and you don't want to come out to where I live. Well, lucky for you, it's actually not where I live. The Supervision, as I mentioned earlier, they are a Chinese company. And I believe they have a shop on AliExpress where you can get this stuff. I'll put a link to it later on after I finish recording this. And I think that's where I initially got some of their paints way back. And then they sent me the sample to try out because I think it was a newer offering that they had. But I bought some of their layered paints at some point early on. And so they're on AliExpress. They also have an Instagram. I'll tag them later so that you can ask them. They're pretty responsive with questions and things. Okay, so here we're already getting some pretty cool separation action going on with these three. So you can see that I like this one a lot. This one's got kind of a maroon colored thing going with blue sparklies. So you don't really get the effect of the mica stuff until it dries more. You're not going to see it so much in this static stage, or in this fluid stage, I mean. Is there any subject that I've ever wanted to paint but never dared to start on? Someone's asking. Let's see. Buildings. I hate buildings. I mean, I like buildings. I like seeing them in art. I love architecture and urban sketching and things, but I am so terrible with maintaining straight lines and things in my pieces and having them converge into vanishing points, actually. And so I mostly admire urban painters and sketchers, and every once in a while I give it a try, but I'm more often frustrated by it. So maybe it just means I need to do more of it. So let's try now taking these three colors and just like painting a wash on here to give myself somewhere to start playing with stuff in a little bit. I'm actually going to mix all three of these in a wet on wet thing just to have a lot of variety going on. And it's good to be pretty heavy with the actual pigment, heavier than I normally do, because as I said, if you have more pigment going here than is more, and more liquid, both of those elements, then you have more well, the water gives more space for the pigment to move around and do its thing, and the pigment in larger quantities is going to be more interesting. Okay, so it doesn't look terribly interesting there, especially from the view of the angle of lighting that you guys can see. So let me shift my lighting around again to give you a slightly different vantage point of it, or a different view of it. So I'm just going to pass my light through here, and you can see how. Okay. And I just have a lot of liquid in here. I'm just letting it go wet on wet, and I'm tilting my page a bit so that stuff spreads and moves, because I love that movement and action and the blooms that watercolor creates when you do that. And again, I'm trying to give you a bit of a view of that. You see, I like the stuff starts to granulate over here, and this is just, you know, my wet on wet mixing of a lot of pigment stuff. So I'm going to set this aside and let it dry and see what happens with it in a little bit. Maybe drop a little bit more water. Okay. So something like this can actually take quite a while to dry. And normally what I like to do when I really want to optimize granulation and the cool textures of watercolors is to not touch it anymore. You just like do this and you like set it aside and you don't do anything until it's dry, because letting it do its thing is where all that magical stuff kind of happens. And if you fuss around with it too much, if you just like take your brush and you start like swiping around and doing things, then that's going to mess with the natural thing that the pigments are doing. So I am gonna mess with it a little bit right now, and like the second preferable option, if you really need something to dry, I have like a little space heater that I stick it next to, and that helps it dry a bit. So I'm gonna turn that on. I'm gonna set that up over to the side of my desk here, out of the way, and I'm gonna let it dry a little bit while we go back to my original sample here. Ooh, see, so some fun things have happened now in the interim as it dried, as I left it alone. Now you can see this gold purple has turned really, really pretty. I think that one's my favorite now. And this bluish maroon one, it's a little bit more subtle the way the blue sparkly stuff works. It is super pretty in person, though. I don't know if you can see that there. And this one is definitely the most subtle of the three. It's got kind of a faint gold sheen to it. And for those of you that are just joining, the stuff that I am using is this Supervision layered mica watercolor pigments. And they have a shop on AliExpress. And they also are on Instagram, so I will tag both those things later, so you can check them out if you want to. A caveat that I mentioned early on in this video was that they are really, really, really fun to play with, but you have to be careful because a lot of them, if you're always selling your artwork, you have to be careful because a lot of them are not completely light fast. So they're a great thing for just letting loose and playing and exploring color and texture and things. But you have to test them out and check to see how light fast they are before using them. There are a few people who've done some light fast tests with Supervision paints, and I believe you can find them if you search around online a little bit. I have not done too much. Primarily what I use them for is playtime. Okay, this one has a lot of binder in it. I need to squeeze some of that out before it can be of use. So binder is just the stuff that is used to get the pigment into a paintable solution. And sometimes if you have a tube of paint that hasn't been used in a long time, the binder just kind of gets a little bit overwhelming, and you have to get past that before you can get to the actual pigment and color. You know, these guys just keep getting prettier and prettier as they dry. That's one of the fun aspects of this, is that as it sits, it changes. So it's almost like it's just this gorgeous thing to watch as it goes. Like you set it going, and then you just step back and you let it do its thing. These are the other two that I just pulled out. Ooh, this one is super pretty. This one has kind of a peacock green look. Okay, again, I've got to shift my light here so that you can see it better. In a second, let me just dot some water in here, and then I'll shift my lighting around so that you all can get a view of that. See, it's got this kind of peacock blue shimmer to it at certain angles. And this one is purpley. I splattered some of the peacock blue stuff in there, so that's what those little green dots are. Our Lady Jack says, and they said watching paint dry is boring. Yeah, this paint drying is fun. Although I could do with it happening a little bit faster. The problem is when I do so much wet and wet that it can actually take a couple hours to dry if I just leave it. You know, I'm not doing it as wet as I would normally if I'm going to do an actual painting. This is sort of thinnish paper. It's just some scrap sketch multimedia paper that I've got. But anyway, aren't those fun? They have this magical look to them. All right, this is the other one that I had going. And you can see there's some really great separation of color going on here with like the blue and that reddish maroon color. It's still drying. And then you can see also the granulation that happens here. That's that interesting texture that goes on there. I'm gonna let this dry some more before I can do anything with it. Let's see, I have a question here. Someone says, do you think they can be ordered from France? Yes, you can order them from France. Like I said, they're on AliExpress, which ships worldwide, comes from China. I think it does take a little while to get everywhere. You have to be a little bit patient for them to arrive, but they do ship worldwide. This one has a lot of binder too. So when I was talking about binder, if you're unfamiliar with watercolor, so I squeezed this tube, and basically all that came out was this clear little pool of stuff. So I need to get rid of some of that binder before I can get to the actual pigment. So I just usually take a paper towel and I just squeeze stuff out onto there until I get to the pigment. Okay, and then once I get pigment, there we go. Now that's paintable stuff. That's paintable pigment. Oh, and if you're curious about these brushes, these are Tracy Lebenzon's handmade magical wand brushes. I love these things. They're made with bamboo handles, and he has synthetic and he has some real hairs, but they are all upcycled, so they are super awesome. I can put a link to Tracy Lebenzon's brushes as well after I finish this video. Let's do this color. Ooh, this is one of my favorite colors. This kind of pale mossy green. think I love it because it does remind me of moss. And I like foresty type stuff. Let's dot some water into that as well. All right, as these other ones have been continuing to dry, I think that my favorite so far is this purpley gold one, because I love the contrast of the gold with the purple, because you get the complementary colors thing going on with that. This one is a little bit disappointing as it's dried. It's got a very subtle gold sheen to it, but it's just this pale blue with that little bit of a sparkle. See, these things, they don't have a color name, they just have a color number. So this purple one is 329. And I can't remember which one was which. Oh yeah, that one up there was 327. And this green one has a silvery sheen with kind of a yellowy green moss color to the pigment. All right, this one has mostly dried enough that I could actually do some painting on top of this if I wanted to now. Let's see. Let's get stuff out of the way. There's a little bit of a wet spot there. I'm going to just dry those. Normally, I would just let them dry on their own, but in the interest of pushing the quickness of that, I'm just going to do that. Okay, so at this point, when I have something, so okay, there's paintings where I plan out everything, where I have a nice sketch beforehand, and I know what I'm going to do with it, and I have, you know, my primary focal part of the piece, and I have my supplementary elements and things. I've got it all sketched out. That's one type of painting. And this type of painting is where I'm just like completely playing, and a lot of times I like to just set out a texture to start with, and then sort of look at it and see what I can find and play with that. And it's more of a intuitive kind of play mode of painting rather than trying to produce something specifically. And let me get out my paints. Let me get everything out. All right, these are my more standard watercolor paints now. These are primarily Daniel Smith, some Winsor Newton, some Holbein, I think, what else? Some Renaissance. I think those are the main brands that I use in my mini palettes. And let's see, what do I've got here? So when I have something like this, I like to just see what shapes and forms I can pull out from it. All right, let's see, what is the best place for my lighting to go for you to see things well. How does that look? Is that a good vantage point? Fireblood says, I miss watching these. Yeah, it's been a long time since I have done any live sessions. Kind of got sucked up in a whole lot of different things in real life. Primarily, which was, I moved last year, or a little bit earlier, a year and a half ago. And then, you know, settling in, and just general life stuff happening. Let's see, where's my white gel pens? When I do these impromptu sort of go with the flow type paintings, I do end up using my white gel pen and my white Daniel Smith watercolor ground quite a bit, because I'm sort of finding shapes as I go. Let's see. It's interesting looking at this from different viewpoints, because as the vantage point that I'm looking at this, the white really blends in with the shininess of the mica, so I can't really see it as much. And then I look at my camera and I could see the white really stark against it, which is interesting. Let's see, someone was asking what kind of paper this is. I'm actually in the middle of trying to find a new paper type that I like, because for the longest time, Moulin de Roy was my favorite, and specifically I like it at 300-pound weight. And sadly, it is no longer available. And I had it stockpiled for a while. I had a large stash of it. Well, at least it felt like a large stash. And then last month I realized I had come down to the bottom of my stash. And so I was very sad about that. And so because I've come down to the last of my stash, I've had to explore and to try to find some new paper types that might be my replacement of the Moulin de Roy. And so far, what I've found, let me see, I tried Cansen's Heritage, did not like that. Although I think that's what I'm painting on right here with this one. I bought a few pads of different papers to try out. So Canson, Heritage, hot press. So first of all, hot press is what I use for everything. I like hot press. I like 300-pound. Although with these samples that I ordered, I bought them all at the 140-pound just so I could give them a try. I made sure that they each had a 300-pound option as well. Let me go and see what the other two were, because I can't remember. I hope you guys can hear me still as I am across the room from my camera. But let's see. I am completely disorganized today, and I can't find what my other two papers were. The other one I was trying was Stonehenge. Stonehenge is the brand. I don't remember specifically, but it's a hot press, 140-pound hot press watercolor paper. And then the third one was completely escaping my mind at this moment. So I'll have to mention it in the notes later because I cannot recall. But I do know that I like both of those better than I like the Canson Heritage. So I think I might settle on one of those once I sort things out. Let's see, Bloodstone is one of my favorite Daniel Smith colors. It doesn't look like much. It just looks like brown here, but it granulates in the most beautiful way. I love it for the granulation aspect. And it's also, I like it for its color as well. It's a good neutral, not a neutral, it's a good warm dark tone that I use. I use Payne's Gray as my cool dark tone, and I use the Daniel Smith Bloodstone as my warm dark tone. And the two of them, I supplement them with what is it called? Neutral tint as my true neutral. So one of the other things I've discovered recently is that when I use transparent watercolor ground, And I sort of dilute it and dot it into something that has a granulation effect. It does this thing where it really pushes the pigment aside. So watch this when I dot this in. Can you see the pigment's actually moving away actively from where I dot this? It's kind of a neat way to push and force granulation. So you can see active, like the granulation is actively happening now as I do that. It actually kind of shoved all those little pigment particles away and then makes them clump a little bit. And you can see they're all moving around. It's like little ants on there. But that's kind of a cool way to force the granulation to really congeal and happen as well. Let me see if I missed any questions as I've been wandering around and staring at. Someone says they've seen Moulin de Roy at Jackson's Art. Yeah, they do still have Moulin de Roy. They just don't have it any longer at 300 pound. It's only available as 140 pound these days. They just stopped making the 300 pound version. And because of the way I work, because I use so much, I use a lot of liquid, and it tends to make my watercolor paper buckle if I don't use the 300 pound stuff. There's a solution with 140 pound. You can actually spray down the back of the paper with just water, and then you press it in between things. But I prefer just to have the thicker stuff. So yeah, I should amend that yes, Moulin de Roy is still available at Jackson's. It's just no longer available in 300 pound. That's what they stopped making. Anyway, okay. Let's continue with this. I've just got this tree going. And I'm letting that upper stuff dry. As I work in these areas. And just kind of trailing out from those wet zones. Hello, people newly joining. I'm just working on a little impromptu piece here. No overarching direction initially. And where I was going mainly, it was a chance to play with some sparkly watercolor pigments and to see how they play and interact on a page. And then now that I have my texturized little bit here, I'm just noodling around with them. By the way, I just want to show you, the palette looks so cool right now with all the separating and shimmery colors on it. It just looks like a painting in itself. Let's see, get some darker colors here to really start to pull out this tree trunk that has emerged. And I think what I want to do, well, I don't really want to because I really like how all this stuff looks, but in the interest of actually turning this into something that has some kind of form, I am taking some white watercolor around and painting in negative space around this tree. I'm going to use a larger brush for that. Now doing this really flattens the color stuff that I had going on in this region of the piece, which is sad. But I can make more. I can do more. I can do other layers if I want. And just sort of pulling out the negative space of sky around this tree. And what's happening then with the rest of this area is it's giving it a very sunset-y vibe. Has this almost abstract look to this. I'm using Daniel Smith white watercolor round. Someone was asking what I'm using to flatten the negative space. So it's just it has like the consistency of gesso, but the nice thing about it is that when it dries, you can actually work watercolor on top of it still. It's still porous enough that the paint will soak in, and you can still use watercolors, which you wouldn't be able to do with gesso because that's more of a plasticky surface to it. So there's clear, it comes in clear, and it comes in white, and it also even comes in black, which is kind of fun to use in combination with pure shimmery mica stuff, because you layer the mica with the black and it just like really pops out from there because the black has this matte look to it. So the one thing to be careful of if you do use watercolor ground is not to use your nice brushes then to paint on top of it, because once it dries, it dries. It's not going to reactivate with liquid, unlike watercolor itself. So the other thing I do is I always make sure to keep a separate water for just watercolors, and then one, if I'm using the watercolor ground, I keep a separate jar for that so that I don't actually mix it, because I don't want to get that stuff into the areas of my brush where I'm not going to be able to wash out. So I have to be careful when using that. And what have I got going on here? Things are looking interesting. It's looking very sparkly. So I'm just continuing to pull out shapes and things with my white gel pen. let's get some darker, more definitive upper areas here, sort of to define the top edge of my tree foliage. And because I did use clear watercolor ground, I don't know if you remember when I was forcing the granulation in these upper areas, and it's still wet, I do not use nice brushes when I do something like this because, again, I don't want to get the watercolor ground into the nice brushes into areas where I'm not going to be able to wash and clean them. How do I keep my paper flat? You use thick paper, but is that enough to keep it from buckling? Do you use tape? Yes, this is taped down. I don't know if you could see it. I usually use masking tape, but I completely ran out. So this is just regular Scotch tape, which is okay in the short run. If you leave it on too long, it tends to leave a lot of residue or something. So I don't like to use it in general, but it's fine for just getting something down. And this is just a little quick piece that I was doing. I wasn't intending to leave it for any real length of time. But yes, I use 300-pound paper normally. This is 140 that I've got right now. And the 300-pound paper, if you don't tape it down, yes, it will still buckle if you use the amount of liquid that I do in my paintings. So I do tape it down. Also, it just makes it makes it easier to handle the piece without worrying about, bending the corners or something. You have it taped down on a board, and then it's all secure like that. I'm just sort of dry brushing, tickling the edges, as my friend Alan Williams says when he's talking about this light, feathery touch. I'm going to zoom in on that so you can see a little bit more. And I'm just taking, this is neutral tint actually, that I'm using for this. And I'm just kind of shaping the upper forms of my tree here. The upper branches, giving them more defined shape. Let's see, I think I need some little critter down here to appreciate the shade of this lovely tree. I think it's going to be a little rabbit. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to do a quick run to replace this water because it's getting kind of cloudy. So give me 30 seconds and I'll be right back. Okay, here I am, clean water. All right, so what was I going to do? Let's see. I think I want a little rabbit. Question is, do I want him sitting on this, which looks like a little stone now, or down in this corner? And is it going to be black or is it going to be white? Let's see. I think I'm going to make him a little black rabbit sitting over there. I've got my super fine tipped number 0 round brush. I'm going to zoom in on that section over there. let's see, I think actually there's another rock over here. It's just going to be a little shadowy dark rabbit. Sitting on this stone. He is looking up over there. Darkening that up a bit, and I'm actually going to darken this little stone that he's sitting on as well. This is dry brushing what I'm doing. It's where I've just got very little bit of pigment on my brush, just enough to sort of do this shading. It's great for doing small details and rendering fine stuff. And I use it very frequently in all my work. It's funny, sometimes doing tiny little bits like this are actually what take the longest as I'm trying to shape it just right. Because when you make this tiny little thing, you don't have much opportunity to fill it with details and things. So you have to just sort of get the gist of it instead. And then I think I want the moon here. This is white gel pen. And then while it's still wet, you can sort of blend the edges of it just like paint. That gives it more of a glow effect than the stark white lines. And a little bit of white around my rabbit. So there we go. That dark section there is still wet, but it's going to dry. And you can see, so what's really fun with the shimmery stuff and layering it with the white watercolor ground is that you end up with these flattened areas where you don't get the shimmer, and then you have that shimmer just shining through on all the positive space areas. So there we go. That was with all this stuff. These were the tools used during the process of this piece. And I will save this to my feed so that you can watch it again if you wish. And I will link all this stuff that I've used here for those of you who had questions about the exact brands and where to get this. Thanks for joining me.